We're starting the Gemara today on Daf Pei Hey Amud Aleph, 6 lines from the top of the Yomid. The Gemara here is talking about the halachas of the Kayin marrying a Chalal. Chalala, that is, a Kayin is not allowed to marry a Chalala. Not allowed to marry a Zaina, not allowed to marry all these women that are apostle for a Kayin. But the question is, what's the halacha in the reverse? If it's a Kayenes, is she allowed to marry any of those men that the Torah says apostle, like a Garosh or so on? So the Gemara says this is a story that happened. Rav Papa and Rav Huna bereid Rav Yeshua iklu lehinsivu. They two were found in the city of Hinsivu, or the Bachas Goyres, the Shechnitzvu, different name. La'asrei de Ravide Barav. This was the place where Ravide Barav, and he was the Rav in that city. So when they arrived there, Boyim Minayu, people asked them about this question. Huzaru ksheirais lehinase lepsulin. Are the Kayanais that are kosher, are they also warned on this Isser not to marry any of those individuals that are apostle for a Kayin? Or maybe not. Maybe it's only for a Zachar, a Kayin, that he's not allowed to marry any of those people that are apostle to him, but a Kayenes is allowed. Amalu Rav Papa, so Rav Papa answered them based on a Mishnah that it says in Masechta Kiddushin. Tenisua, we learned there in the Mishnah. The Mishnah there says, Asara Yuchsin Olam Mibavel. There are 10 different levels of yichus, of people with various different levels of their lineage that came up from Bavel by the second Beis HaMikdash. What are they? There's Kayanim, Leviim, Yisraelim, Chalalim, person that's a Chalal, a Kayan that's a Chalal, Geirim, converts, Charurim, people that were freed, Mamzeirim, Nesinim. We learned about the Nesinim before, those that converted in the times of Yeshua, and they are also to marry into Klal Yisrael. Shtuki, which is an individual that when he people ask about his lineage, you quiet him down because we don't know who his father is. A Sufi, a person that was picked up in the street and we don't know who his father or mother is. So those are the different categories of Yidden that came up from Bavel. Now the Mishnah explains, Kainim, Leviim, Yisraelim, Mutarim Lavi Zebezeh. These three are allowed to marry one another. Leviim, Yisraelim, Chalalim, and Geidim, and Charurim, Mutarim Lavi Zebezeh. Then these, the Leviim, Yisraelim, and the Chalalim, Geidim, Charurim, they are allowed to marry one another, but Kainim not though. Because Kainim can't marry Geidim and Charurim because they may have had a relationship with a guy before they got married, so they're not allowed. But the Leviim, Yisraelim are allowed with these. Geidi, Charuri, Mamzeiri, Nisini, Shtuki, and Asufi, all of these categories, which are the last ones mentioned here, Mutarim Lavi Zebezeh, they are allowed to marry one another. But these, not all of them are allowed to marry into Klal Yisrael. Right? A Mamzer, Nesini, Shtuki, they're not allowed to marry into Klal Yisrael. So the Shtuki and a Sufi is a Suffolk Mamzer, not allowed to marry into Klal Yisrael. They can marry a Geidi and Charuri, but not into regular Kohol Yisrael, Leviim Yisraelim. So that's the Mishnah. So now, based on this Mishnah, Rav Papa says, look, V'ilu Kayanois L'chalal Loikatani. It doesn't mention here in the Mishnah that a Kayenes could marry into a Chalal. When the Mishnah said before that Leviim and Yisraelim could marry a Chalal, it said only Leviim and Yisraelim, but not Kainim, or not a Kayenes either. So we see from this Mishnah that Kainim, whether it's a Zachar, whether it's a Nekeva, a Kayin can't marry a Chalal or a Chalala. So this is a raya that the same Isser applies to a Kayenes. So Rav Huna bereid Rav Yeshua did not accept this raya. Only Rav Huna bereid Rav Yeshua. No, there's a reason why the Mishnah does not say this. Even if it's true that a Kayenes could marry a Chalal, but still the Mishnah does not mention it. Why? Kol heiche dahani nosvi mehani v'hani nosvi mehani. If it goes both ways, if the Zachar could marry the Nekeva or the Nekeva could marry the Zachar, if the heter goes both ways, so Katani, that's what the Mishnah is saying. When it mentions in the Mishnah, Leviim and Yisraelim could marry Chalalim and Geidim, it doesn't matter if the husband is a Levi and the wife is a Ger, or it's the other way around. The wife is a Levi and the husband is a Chalal. If it goes both ways, that's what the Mishnah is mentioning, that they can marry one another. But Kayin, when it comes to the case of a Kayin and a Chalal, Kivin, the Ilu Bayil, Mintzav Chalala, Asirelei, the Kayin which is the Zachar, he's not allowed to marry a Chalala. And so even if it's true that the Kahenes is allowed to marry a Chalal, but the Kayin is not allowed, so it doesn't go both ways, so therefore like Katani. It does not mention this, it doesn't bring over here this, that a Kahenes is allowed to marry a Chalal. So therefore the Raya from this Mishnah is no Raya. So this was the discussion that Rav Papa and Rav Huna bereid Rav Yeshua had when they came into the city, when people asked them this question. Then Asala Kamei de Ravidi Baravin. So they came to Ravidi Baravin and they told over to him this discussion and that they had. Amaloho. So Ravidi Baravin said to them, Dardiki. It's like children discussing this matter and they have no idea what they're talking about. Hachi Amar Rav Yudah Marav. Rav Yudah Marav already said this, which the Gemara quoted before, that lehuzaru ksheiros linasil psulim. This isser of a kohen marrying psulim does not apply to kohenes, which is ksheiros. They do not have this isser to marry psulim. That's it. So he already paskin about this, that there's no isser whatsoever. So there's no reason to discuss this. Going back to the Mishnah, it said shniyos medivrei seifrim v'chulu. So the Mishnah said that the shniyos medivrei seifrim. What was the Mishnah over there said? Regarding the shniyas medivrei seifrim, just a second, the lashon of the Mishnah was, there's a case where it's a shniya to the Baal and not a shniya to the Yavam. Let's say you have a woman, which you have two brothers, and they share the same father, but they don't share the same mother. And if they don't share the same mother, it's possible that there should be one woman that is a shniya, she's an erva midrabanan for the husband, but not for his brother. For his brother, she's not an erva. Let's say it's his maternal grandmother, and it's not the brother's maternal grandmother. So for him, she's not an erva. That's the case that the Mishnah was speaking about. So the Gemara has a question regarding this concept. The people of Beiri asked a question from Rav Sheshes. Shniya lebal. What happens if you have a case of a woman, she is an erva midrabanan for the husband, but v'loi shniya liyavam. But for the brother, the yavam, she's not an erva midrabanan at all. So now the question is, Yeshla ksuba mi yavam oiloi. Will she get a ksuba from the yavam or not? Now she definitely does not get a ksuba from her husband. That's one of the halachas the Mishnah says, that if a woman marries a man, which is asim d'rabbanan to marry her, she gets no ksuba from him. But now the question is, even if she doesn't get a ksuba from her husband, because she's asked to be married to him, but maybe since the brother, the yavam, is not a erva for her, maybe she should get a ksuba from the yavam. And the Gemara explains the two sides of this question. Do I say, Kivin da mamar, we learned before in the Masechta, Ksubasa al nichse bayla harishan. Where does the ksuba of a yavam come for? He's not the one that has to pay for the ksuba. The ksuba by a yavam comes from the brother that died. The money from the brother that died, that's where the money of the ksuba comes from. So therefore, lesla. So over here in this case, she got no ksuba from the husband that she was married to because she was asked to be married to him. So even though now she's allowed to be married to the yavam, but nevertheless she gets no ksuba because her ksuba comes from that husband. Or perhaps we should say, no, she does get a ksuba from the yavam. Why? Kivin the ilu lesla mirishan. The halacha we learned also earlier in the Masechta. What happens if that husband that she was married to had no money? He passes away and now she has a yavam she has to get married to and he has no money at all. So then the halacha is to kinu l'rabbanan misheni. Chachamim instituted that now the yavam will have to give a ksuba from his own money. So maybe over here, misheni isla. So over here as well, I should say that since in this case she gets no ksuba from her husband that she was married to because she was not allowed to be married to him, so maybe over here she should have to get a ksuba from the yavam himself. Just like in a case where the husband that died had no money, so she gets from the yavam himself, even though over here he has money, but she gets no ksuba from that husband because she was not allowed to be married to him, maybe she gets a ksuba from the yavam. Amalu Rav Sheshes, so Rav Sheshes said, this says in the Braisa, this halacha, Tenisua, we learned in the Braisa, Ksubasa al nichse baila rishain, the ksuba that she gets comes from the possessions, from the money of her first husband. Even after she goes and she has a yavam she's getting married to, but the money of the ksuba comes from the first husband. And then the Braisa says clearly regarding this halacha we asked there, V'im hoisa shniya lebal. But if her first husband that she was married to, she was asked to be married to him, there was a erva midrabanan, then afilim yavam einla. So then even from the yavam she will not get any ksuba. So the Braisa clearly says that she does not get any ksuba, not from the first husband, and not even from the yavam either. Okay, so our question is answered. But the Gemara now clarifies the pshat in the language of the Braisa. The Braisa said, even, she doesn't get afilu, even from the yavam, she doesn't get a ksuba. Frek the Gemara, meklal, the Islam, the yavam. Did I skip a few words? Meklal, the ikke, the Islam, the yavam. Does that mean that I can understand from this Braisa that sometimes a woman does get a ksuba from the yavam? The Braisa uses the expression that even from the yavam she won't get, meaning sometimes she would get from the yavam, but over here even from the yavam she doesn't get. Why are we saying that? I mean, always the ksubah of a Yevama comes from the first husband, not from the Yavam. So the Gemara explains the point that we already saw before, that sometimes you do get from the Yavam. There's something missing here in the language of this Braisa, and you have to add in the words to clarify what it's saying. Ksubasa al nichse baila harishain. The ksubah comes from the possessions of the first husband. V'ilesla mirishain. But this is what you have to add into the Braisa. In a case where the first husband has no money, so then tekinu la misheni. Chachamim instituted that she gets the ksubah from the yavam. So there is a case where the yavam has to pay for the ksubah. V'im haisa shniya lebal. And in a case where this Yevama was a shniya, she was not allowed to be married to the husband, so then afilim yavam einla. So then she doesn't get a ksubah not from the first husband and not from the yavam either, because she wasn't allowed to be married to the first husband. Now another question, the Gemara goes back to what it said in the Mishnah. In the Mishnah, it said that when it comes to a shniya, person that's married to someone, that's evram d'Rabbanan, you get no ksubah. Now, she's not allowed to be married, she gets no ksubah. But then the Mishnah said, a woman that's married to someone where there's a isam in atayra, like an almana to a kohen gadol, a grushan a chalutza to a kohen hedyet, over there you do get a ksubah. The Gemara will soon explain why that is. You would think that if it's a isam in atayra, for sure you shouldn't get a ksubah. But the halach is that you do get a ksubah. But so on this, the Gemara has a shaila. Rabbi Elazar asked Rabbi Yochanan the following question: Almana lekohen gadol, an almana that's married to kohen gadol, which is of course not allowed. Grusha v'chalutz lekohen hedyet, also not allowed. So the question is, yeshlen mizaynis, do they get the sustenance that a woman usually gets from the husband, or they do not get the sustenance from their husband? Now, what's the question? In what case are we asking this question? Hey Chidami, what are we speaking about? To say, is the case over here that she's married to him and she's living together with him. So how could you even have a question whether she gets sustenance from him? Every single moment the Torah is saying that he must get up and send his wife away. And Mezainis Islah, you're going to say that he should be the one that's going to be feeding her? Why would I say such a thing? So the Gemara says, I'll tell you when the question is. The question over here is, they're not living together. He got married to her, but he left overseas. And she went and borrowed money from someone to eat. So here the question is, what's the halacha when he comes back? Will he have to reimburse? Will he have to pay back that person that she borrowed money from him? Do I say, the Gemara explains the two sides of the question. One hand I can say, Tnai ksube ninu. The fact that a husband has to support his wife, that's one of the conditions written into the ksubah. So therefore what I say is, mide isla ksubah. Since regarding this kind of a marriage, even though it's asam and atayre, but nevertheless the Mishnah said that she gets a ksubah. When he divorces her or when he passes away, she gets a ksubah. As the Gemara will soon explain why that is, but she gets a ksubah. So therefore Islam is aini. The fact that he has to feed her and support her is part of the conditions of the ksubah, and he has to give her the mezainis as well. Or maybe no, there's a difference. Ksubah, when it comes to the actual ksubah, the lemishkal umeipek, where she takes it and leaves. When does she get the ksubah? When the husband divorces her or when he dies. So she's getting it when she's leaving the husband. So that I could say isla. That she gets,
But we should get the ksubah before, after.
That's the halach of a ksubah. The ksubah is money that a woman gets, and the money that she gets when the husband divorces her. So that isla. That I could say that she gets because she's leaving this marriage, which is forbidden. But if you're talking about mezainis, which is the fact that a husband supports his wife while she's married to him, why should she get this? Now that she sees she's getting support from her husband, this will only cause her to remain married to her husband. Less law. So maybe that she does not get, that you can't compare that to the fact that she gets the ksubah. That was the question that was asked from Rabbi Yochanan. So what did Rabbi Yochanan answer? Al malay lesla. It makes sense to say that she doesn't get support from her husband while she's married to him. Even if he's overseas, he doesn't come and support her and pay back because we don't want her to remain married to this husband, which is forbidden. Frag the Gemara of Tanya, but we learned clearly in a Braisa regarding this exact question, yeshla, that she does get support from her husband. That says the Gemara, Kitanya, when it says in the Braisa that she gets the support from the husband, la'acha misa. That's only after he passes away. Rashi brings before here the lashon that it says in the ksubah, this that a husband takes responsibility to support his wife. It's not only while they're married, even after he passes away. The lashon that it says in the ksubah is kol yemei meger ar melusech. All the days of you being an almana and you living in my house, so the woman also gets support from the husband's inheritance. Of the husband's possessions, of his estate, that is. So over here as well, when the Braisa says that she gets support from this husband, it's only after he passes away. While the husband is alive, so we don't want her to remain married to him, so we don't want her to be supported by him, so she doesn't get anything. After he passes away, so she's not married to him anymore. So over then, she will get that support. Is the Amri, others say the version of the way this discussion went over here, the same conclusion, but just the way the discussion went was a bit different. Amalei, what Rabbi Yechanan said is, Tanya Yeshla, you're asking me a question, whether this woman gets support, the mezainis. So he answered him, yeah, we learned in the Braisa that she does receive the support. So he asked him back, that he has to get up and send away this wife. He should divorce her every single moment. He has that chiyuv to support, to leave her, to divorce her, that is. So how could you say that she gets support from him? So the question is, but hatanya yeshla, in a Braisa it says that she does get the support. Kitanya ila chamisa. That Braisa was only said after he passed away, then she gets support. But while he's alive and she's married to him, it doesn't make any sense that she should get support from this husband that the Torah says that he has to send her away. Taner Rabbanan, we learned in the Braisa. Now here, finally, in this Braisa, it will explain the reason for this halacha that we're learning here. That when a woman is married to someone, which is only asam b'Rabbanan, she gets no ksuba. When a woman is married to someone which is asam and atayre, like an almana to a kohen gadol and so on, over there she does get an ksuba. So the discussion at the next piece of Gemara will be what's the reason for this chiluk. The Braisa first starts off with the halacha itself. Almana lekohen gadol, an almana married to a kohen gadol, or a grusha v'chalutza lekohen hedyet, or a grusha and a chalutza that is married to a kohen hedyet. So yesh lo ksuba, she gets a ksuba when she leaves. Peiris, her husband has to reimburse her of any fruits, any produce that he ate from her fields. Mezainis, he has to give her support that we just spoke about. So, I mean, that this, according to the conclusion that we just said, the mezainis is only after he passes away. Balois are any leftover garments that are worn out that she brought into the marriage. He has to give it back to her. But because this is a marriage which is asam and atayre, what happens? V'hipsula, this passes her, she becomes a halala, and vlada pasal. Her children will also become kainim that are pasal. The pasals of children, they become a halal. That's regarding this marriage which is asam and atayre. And v'kaifenaisai lahaitzi, we force the husband to send away his wife. Anyone that's married to a wife, which is only a erva midrabanan, ein lo ksube. In this case, she gets no ksube, loy peiris. She gets no fruits either. The husband doesn't have to reimburse her. Loy mezainis. She gets no support, not even after he passed away. V'loy baloi. She doesn't take any of her worn out garments that she brought into the marriage. And avihi ksheira. She herself will remain kosher to marry a kohen. He said the fact that she got married to someone that's only a erva midrabanan does not make her a halala. And vlada kosher. The child that's born is also going to remain a child that's kosher to marry a kohen. A marriage that's asam midrabanan does not passel the children. And the kaifenaiselaitzi also, but because it's an isser, so of course we force the husband to divorce her. Rab Shimon ben Elazar explained this. Why was it said almana lekohen gadol and almana married to a kohen gadol, which is a isser min atayre? Yesh la ksuba, she gets a ksuba. So the answer is mipnei shehu pasel and vihi psula. That's because he becomes pasel through this, and she becomes pasel through this. Right, Rashi says, but who pasel means there's a Mishnah in B'chayris that says a kohen, as long as he's married to a woman that's pasel to him, he's not allowed to do daved in the Beis Hamikdash. So he becomes pasel, and she also becomes pasel. She becomes a halala. And therefore, v'chol makom shehu pasol v'hi psula. Anytime there's a marriage over here, this is a isam and atayra, and therefore this marriage makes him pasol and it makes her pasol. Kansu oisai ksuba. The knas over here is that he gives a ksuba. Rashi says that this lashon is a little bit interesting. It means there is no real knas here. It means that the knas is he actually has to give a ksuba the way he usually has to give. We don't cause her to have to lose her ksuba. So Rashi explains this, the pshat over here is, why doesn't she lose her ksuba? Because since this is a kind of marriage that she knows that she becomes pasal and her husband's becoming pasal, we rely on the reality itself to cause that she's going to get divorced from him. Why? Because she's not going to she's not going to be happy with this marriage. She's going to look at herself and say, look, I'm becoming pasal with this marriage. Eventually she's going to get into a fight with her husband and she's going to go away from him. So therefore, the Chachamim did not impose another knas to cause her to want to leave her husband. It's just going to happen on its own. On the other hand, why is it when she's married to someone which is only shniyas midrabanan, so then ein len ksubah, these kind of women do not get their ksubah? So the answer is mipnei shehu kosher, because the husband remains kosher, and v'hi ksheira, she also remains kosher, and v'chol makim shehu kosher v'hi ksheira, and in any place where he remains kosher, he can still do the avodah, and she remains kosher. So over here, this woman, there's no reason for her to leave this marriage. Everything is good and fine. So therefore, here Chachamim had to impose a knas, a penalty, that she will not receive her ksubah, and therefore that will cause her to want to leave her husband. So basically, this is the explanation for why dafke by an Isam Rabbanan, where she thinks to herself, there's no psul that's happening to me, so therefore Chacham had to create a special knas for her to leave her husband. That's what Rab Shimon ben Elazar says. Now Rebbe gives a different reason. Halalu divrei Torah. The Isser of an Almana marrying a Kohen Gadol, a Grusha marrying a Kohen Hedyet, those are things that are Asam in HaTorah. When you have an Isser in HaTorah, it doesn't need anything to strengthen this Isser. We don't need something to come and intensify the Isser. A woman understands herself that this is a very strong Isser, so even if the Isser was done, she will eventually leave on her own. But when it comes to the Isser of Shniyos, which is only Midrabanan, when it comes to Isser Midrabanan, because it's an Isser that's lighter in people's eyes, it needs to be encouraged for people to fulfill. So here Chachamim imposed the extra knas that she doesn't get her ksubah. Davar acher, yet another pshat here, seemingly a third pshat of this. Again, we're coming to explain the reason for the difference. Why by a Isser Min HaTorah does she still get a ksubah, and why, if she's over Isser Midrabanan, does she not get the ksubah? So another pshat over here is Zehu Margila. When it comes to a woman that's married to someone, and there's a Isser Min HaTorah, like the case of the Braisa, the Almana to the Kohen Gadol, or the Grusha to the Kohen Hedyet, he's the one that's Margila. Margila means he's the one that's calling her in, or how do they translate Margila over there? He's the one that's Margila, he's the one that's causing her to get married to him. He persuades her. He's the one that's persuading her to get married to him. And v'zu he margilasai. When it comes to Isser Midrabanan, if the whole marriage is only Isser Midrabanan, she's the one that's persuading him to get married to her. What's the reason for this difference? So Rashi explains. B'chlal, there's a klal, the Gemara says this in Masechta Kedushin, a woman wants to get married to a husband more than the husband wants to get married to a man. So therefore, again, more than the man wants to get married to a woman, that is. Okay? So because the woman wants to get married more, we say anytime there's a marriage, it's probably she that persuaded him to get married. Besides, if it's a case that her children are becoming puzzled through this marriage. If her children are becoming puzzled from this marriage, we're not going to think that she's persuading him to get married. Then we're going to say it's probably him. He had a taiva and he decided that he wants to get married to him. So again, the pshat of what the Gemara is saying over here is, if it's Isser Min HaTorah and the children are becoming puzzled, so we're not going to assume that she was persuading him to commit for this marriage. The children are going to become puzzled. So then we say he's the one that persuaded her. But over here, if it's Isser Midrabanan, so because the children are not becoming puzzled, we say that it's she that was more desperate to be married, and therefore she's the one that persuaded him. And therefore, in this case, by the Isser Midrabanan, when she persuaded him, there's the knas that she does not get the ksubah. So now that's the davar acher. This is the last pshat in the Braisa. But now the Gemara wants to know davar acher man katanila. Who is saying this last pshat? Before the Braisa brought the last pshat, it already said two pshatim. One in the name of Rab Shimon ben Elazar, and one in the name of Rebbe. Who now is saying this third pshat in the Braisa? So the Gemara says that this third pshat in the Braisa is actually coming to clarify the two pshatim that it said before. And there's two ways how to look at this. There are those that say Rab Shimon ben Elazar katanila. It's Rab Shimon ben Elazar that's saying this davar acher. Uma tam ka'omar. He's coming to clarify the point that he already said before. Ma tam amru. What's the reason why it was said? Hu pasal v'hi psula. If it's a marriage which is Asam Min HaTorah and the husband becomes pasal, you can't do the avodah. She becomes pasal as well. Kansu oisay ksubah. So over there, he still has to give the ksubah. And so what's the reason for this? So now, in the davar acher, Rab Shimon ben Elazar is explaining this, mipnei shehu margila, because in that case, It's the husband that persuaded her to get married to him. She would never want this marriage. Since she knows she becomes pasul, her children will become pasul, she never wanted this marriage. If he's the one that persuaded her, so he's going to still have to pay the ksuba. It's not her that caused this, and therefore she will still get her ksuba. And what's the reason why? If it's only Ism b'Derabanan and he remains kosher, she remains kosher, her children remain kosher, so over here, she does get a knas that she does not receive the ksubah. Because in such a case, we assume that she's the one that persuaded him into this marriage. So therefore, she's the one that gets this knas. So Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar was explaining what he said before, that it's all based on who's the one that we assume persuaded this marriage to happen. And that's the one that gets the knas. That's one pshat. That this davar acher is part of the explanation of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. There are others that said, Rebbe Katanila. Rebbe is the one that adds this, Davar Acher. Rebbe is giving another pshat here. Why is Rebbe saying another pshat? What was the pshat that Rebbe said? Divrei Teire ein tzrichim chizuk, and Divrei Tzayfrim tzrichim chizuk. For something that's minat Teire, you don't need to have an additional knas. Something that's midrabanan, people treat it lighter, so you need an additional knas. So why does Rebbe have to add a Davar Acher? What's the need for another pshat here? So the point is as follows. Why is Rebbe saying this? V'chalutza kakashile. The Braisa, when it mentions those that do receive a ksubah, it doesn't only mention the almana to the kohen gadol and the grusha to kohen hedyot. It also mentions a chalutza. That a chalutza gets a ksubah. A chalutza that married a kohen hedyot. Now v'ha chalutza derabanan. A chalutza, a woman that had a chalitza done to her. This is only a ism derabanan. So how could it put chalutza together with grusha to say that a chalutza is like a grusha and she gets a ksubah? If Rebbe is saying that the rule is anytime there's only a ism d'Rabbanan, she will not get a ksubah because divrei seifrim tzrichin chizuk. So why does a chalutza get her ksubah? The isla ksubah, and the Braisa says she gets a ksubah. So therefore hada ama. So therefore Rebbe adds a second shot. And what's the second shot here? Kivin the pasala midrabanan, or the Bach actually adds in over here a word. Kivin the pasala mitrum midrabanan. A chalutza, even though the chalutza, the isser of a chalutza marrying a kohen is only a isser midrabanan. But what happens when a chalutza marries a kohen? So then she loses midrabanan her ability to eat truma. If she's a bas kohen and she's a chalutza and she marries a kohen, she's not allowed because she's a chalutza, she loses her ability to eat truma. So therefore, by the very fact that she loses her ability to eat truma, we assume that she did not persuade him to get married to her. Zehu margila. So over here we say he's the one that persuaded her to get married to her. And vizu he margilase. Only in a case where she does not lose her truma, then I say that she's the one that persuaded him to get married to her. So therefore, he's adding in this second shot of chalutza to explain why by a chalutza she does not lose her ksubah. Because in such a case, because she's going to be losing her truma, probably she did not persuade him to get married to her. That's why he's adding this second shot. Okay, so now it comes out from what we learned here in the Braisa that we have two pshatim why there is this distinction between a ism and a Torah, the marriage where there's a ism and a Torah, and the marriage when there's a ism d'Rabbanan. We have the pshat of Rebbe, which is that there's a difference between divrei Torah don't need chizuk, and divrei seifrim d'Rabbanan they need extra chizuk. And then we have the pshat of Rab Shimon ben Elazar, going back to the first interpretation that the Gemara said here. According to Rab Shimon ben Elazar, that the question is, who is the one that persuaded this marriage to happen? If it's her, she loses the ksuba from him. If it's him, so then he has to pay the ksuba. Those are the two reasons. So the Gemara will now explain what's the practical difference between these two reasons. What's the practical difference between Rebbe and Rab Shimon ben Elazar's reason? Rav Chisda said the difference would be mamzeres and esina Yisrael. When you have a mamzeres or an esina that are both isurim minat Torah and they're alav minat Torah, and they got married to a Yisrael. Ikke benayu, that's the difference between them. And the Gemara explains the difference. The one that says that the point over here is that as long as it's an Issa Minat Taira, so then he has to pay the Ksubah, because the words of Taira don't need any additional Chizuk. Hanami Deiraisa, this is Issa Minat Taira, so he'll have to pay the Ksubah. The one that says that the point is that because the children are becoming puzzle, she's becoming puzzle, so therefore he's the one that persuaded her to get married to him. In this case, he Margalale. She's the one that's persuading him to get married to her. Why? Because she's not losing anything from this marriage. She's already a mamzeres, or it's already a nesina. She's already puzzle, and therefore she's not losing anything from getting married over here. And therefore, we say that she's the one that persuaded this marriage, and therefore she's going to lose the ksubah. So the Gemara now says this nafkamina, this difference between the two reasons, doesn't work according to everybody. Why? Well, Rabbi Eliezer says. So Rashi, before I go weiter in the Gemara, Rashi explains that what's the halacha of a mamzeres? The children of a mamzeres also are a mamzer. Right? Then the soul of mamzeres goes to the children, to the next generation forever. But we learned before in the Gemara, there is a way how you could make your children to become back into regular kosher yidden. How is that? If you marry a shifcha, a mamzer is allowed to marry a shifcha, or in this case, a mamzeres is allowed to marry a evet kanani, and then the children that are born will also be avadim, and then you free them, and then they become part of Klal Yisrael. So therefore, what the Gemara was saying before is that because this woman knows that her children could become kosher yidden, she wants to marry into Klal Yisrael in order for her children to become kosher. Even though in this case, her children will not become kosher, but if she knows that it's possible to kasher her children, so therefore she wants to marry into Klal Yisrael in order to kasher her children. Okay, so therefore we assume that she's the one that persuaded him to get married to her. So therefore, she will not get her ksubah. But the Gemara asks in this, but Rabbi Eliezer says, Harei ze eved umamzer, that there's no way how to ever kasher children that are children from mamzerim. And that means even if she would go and marry an eved, and now the children that are born are avodim, those children remain a eved and a mamzer. And even if you free them, nothing's going to change. You can't ever kasher children from a mamzer. So if so, she's not going to try to get married to this person because she knows that her children are going to be puzzle and there's no way for her to kasher him. So she's not the one that's going to try to create this marriage over here. So this is not a good nafkamina. In such a case, there's no reason for a knas. Therefore Rav Yosef says another pshat. Here's the case where there's an afkamina between the two reasons of Rabbi and Abshim ben Elazar. Machze gerusha mishanisis. A person that remarries a woman that he divorced after she already got married to someone else. So in such a case, he's being over on a lav. So this will be the difference. The Gemara explains, the opinion that says that as a isminat Torah, and therefore, in such a case, she does not lose her ksubah because divrei Torah ein tzrichim chizok. So hanami deiraisa. This is also issa deiraisa. But aman da'amah mepnei shehu margila, the one that says that the reason why she does not, that she does lose her ksubah, is mipnei shehu. Again, let me say this again. Uman da'amah mipnei shehu margila, the one that says that he has to pay the ksubah, and that is because he's the one that persuaded her to get married to him. Over here in this case, she's the one that was persuading him to get married to her. Why? Because her children will not become puzzle. In the case of a person that remarries his grusha, it's an isser of halav, but the children do not become mamzerim. It's just an isser of halav. So since the children don't become mamzerim, the premise always is that a woman wants to get married more than the husband. So as long as the children are kosher, we assume that she's the one that persuaded him to get married to her. So therefore, in such a case, she loses the ksubah. But the Gemara says that this nafkamin is also not according to everybody. Well, Rabbi Akiva's opinion is yesh mamzeh mechayv elavin, that even the children that are born from a isser of a lav, the children will be mamzeidim. So midi, she will not persuade him to get married to her because the children will be mamzeidim. So this is not an nafkamina. So according to this opinion, she will not be getting the ksubah because she's not the one that persuaded. Therefore Rav Papa says there's another nafkamina. Be'ula l'kohen gadol. A woman that was a be'ula, and therefore she's not a besula. So in such a case, getting married to a Kohen Gadol, over here there's no Isser of a Lav. There's only an Isser of a Esse. There's an Esse, Ki'im, B'sulav Ama Yikoch, so there's only an Isser of a Esse. Ikke Benaya, that would be the difference. The opinion that says that as long as it's Isser Menat Teire, so in such a case, Divrei Teire ain't tzrichen chizok, and you have to pay the ksubah. Hanami deraisa. This is ism and Teire, so you have to pay the ksubah. Oman da'ama mipnei shuhu margila, in an opinion that says that it's because he persuaded her to get married to him. That's why he has to pay the ksubah. Ha he margilale. In this case, since she does not become puzzle, her children don't become puzzle, she's the one that persuaded him to get married to her. So over here, she's going to lose her ksubah. But again, the Gemara says this is not everybody agrees to this. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, the Omar, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, Yesh chalal mechayve yaseh. Even in this case where the whole Isser is only a aseh, the children will become a chalal. So halei margale v'lei midi. She for sure did not persuade him to get married to her. She doesn't want her children to become chalalim. So this is not an afkamina. In such a case, there's no reason for her to lose her ksubah. Ravashi, so Ravashi says another case where there could be an afkamina. Machzer sofik soitasai ikke benayu. A case where a person has a relation with his wife, which is a saita, and the Gemara calls this a sofik saita. This is the regular case of a saita. What's the halacha of a saita? A person that suspects his wife of having a relation with someone else. He warned her, and then she went with someone else. What's the halacha by a saita? He has to bring her to the Beis Hamikdash to drink waters to determine whether she actually had a relation with someone else. And until she doesn't drink that water, he's not allowed to have a relation with her. It's a isam and atayra. And he did. He had a relation with her. That's the case that we're speaking about over here. In such a case, whether she loses the ksubah or not. So the one that says that as long as it's a isam and atayra, so she does not lose the ksubah. Hanami dairaisa. This is a isam and atayra for him to have relations with her. So therefore, she does not lose the ksubah. The one that says that in any case that he is the one that's persuading her, so then she does not lose the ksubah, ha hi margalele. Over here, she's the one that's persuading him to have relations with him. Why? Because she doesn't become puzzle. She doesn't lose anything. She doesn't become puzzle. So therefore, we're going to assume that she's the one that was persuading him, and therefore she does lose the ksubah. But again, the Gemara brings that there's an opinion that says that even over here she becomes puzzle. Rav Masya ben Charash the Omar, Rav Masya ben Charash said that in such a case she would become puzzle. Afila halach baila lashkaisa. Even if she was going together with her husband on the way to Yerushalayim, she was a saita and she was traveling together with her husband to Yerushalayim in order for her to drink the waters of the saita to determine if she's a zayna or not. Uba aleh baderech, and he had relations with her on the way. Asa Zaina. Just by this, she becomes a Zaina. Even in such a case, she does become a Zaina. So even though it's not affecting any of her children are not going to become Mamzeidim, but it will passel her. She's going to become a Zaina. So if she becomes a Zaina through this, we could assume she did not persuade him. So she's not the one that persuaded him. Why not? So Rashi says she would rather just wait until they come to Yerushalayim and drink the waters. She's claiming that she never had a relation with anybody else. She's claiming that she's not a Zaina B'chlal. So why would she want to have a relation with him now to become a Zaina? So she definitely did not persuade him. He persuaded her. So why should she lose the ksubah? So this is not an afkamina either. So the final thing the Gemara says is, what would be the nafkamina? Mar Baravashi says, Saita Vadai Ike Benayu, a case of a Saita Vadai. Saita Vadai means it's an Eishes Ish, that we know for a fact that she was mizana with someone else, and therefore in such a case she becomes asa to her husband. In such a case, we assume that she's the one that persuaded him to have a relation with her. Why? Because her children will not become puzzle, and she herself, even though there's a law for her to have a relation with her husband, but she's already a Zaina. So therefore she's not losing anything by this relationship, and therefore we assume that she's the one that persuaded him to have this relation with him, and therefore she loses her ksubah. So this is the nafkamina, this is the case. If we say the reason is because any isam and atayra, you don't lose the ksubah, because divrei atayra ain't tzrichim chizdik, she would not lose the ksubah. But if the reason is because she persuaded him to have this relation, in this case we assume that she persuaded him, because she's not losing anything by this relation. Let's go a little bit weiter in the Gemara. Sagt Heilige Mishneh, Bas Yisrael Moreses Lekayin. Bas Yisrael, that's Moreses Takayin. In other words, only the first stage of marriage, but they had no relations with him yet. Muberes Mekayin. She's a Muberes from a Kayin, a Bas Yisrael that was married to a Kayin, and she's pregnant from this Kayin. Shemeres Yavam Lekayin. She's a Shemeres Yavam, she's waiting for Yibum from a Kayin. V'chein, similar bas kohen li Yisrael, and a bas kohen that got married to a Yisrael. So all of these, lo teichel b'truma. They don't eat truma. We learned this already earlier in the Masechta, where the Mishnah over there said the klal is a ubar, a yabam, and an edison. So they don't passel. They passel her from eating truma, and because of this, she will not be able to eat truma either. So in all these cases, they don't eat truma. Now, similar halacha, the Mishnah says, Bas Yisrael me'ureses leLevi, a Bas Yisrael that has an edison to a Levi, the first stage of marriage to a Levi, Mu'beres meLevi, she's pregnant from a Levi, Shemeres Yavam leLevi, she's waiting for the Yivam to a Levi, V'chein Bas Levi li Yisrael, so to a Bas Levi that got married to Yisrael, Lo toichal b'maiser. She cannot eat maiser. This refers to Maiser Rishon. Maiser Rishon belongs to a Levi, so in any of these cases, she will not be able to eat maiser. What this Mishnah is basically saying is that maiser rishon is something that only a Levi could eat. Nobody else could eat unless you're a wife of a Levi or you're a Bas Levi. So the Gemara will address this because this is a unique chiddush. B'pashtas, maiser is something that anybody could eat. Truma is something that's only for a kohen and nobody else could eat unless you're the wife of a kohen or you were married to a kohen and you have children from a kohen. But over here the Mishnah is saying that the same halacha applies to maiser as well. This is a very big chiddush. Weiter the Mishnah says, Mu'uresas l'kohen, Mu'uberes m'kohen, Shemeres Yavam l'kohen, V'chein Bas kohen l'Levi, Loi toichal, Loi betrume, V'loi b'maiser. Cannot eat not truma and not maiser, like we said. So the Gemara now addresses this case regarding the Maiser Rishon. Fragt the Gemara, V'tehei Zara, let this woman be just a plain Yisrael. And still, Zara, Milay Achla b'Maiser, a Zara cannot eat the Maiser Rishon of the Levi. You have to give the Maiser Rishon to the Levi, but then anybody could eat it. So why are we saying over here that only the woman that's married to the Kohen, and there are all these exceptions, if she's not fully married, if she's only Me'uberes, and so on? Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel, Hamani Rav Meiri. Our Mishnah follows the opinion of Rav Meir. The Amar Rav Meir's opinion is Maiser Rishon asal azarim. Maiser Rishon, azar is not allowed to eat. Similar to truma, just like truma is only for a kohen and nobody else is allowed to eat the truma. So according to Rav Meir, Maiser Rishon is the same thing, that it's only for a Levi and no one else is allowed to eat it. The Tanya will learn in a brayse machlekes about this. So Rav Meir's opinion is truma lekohen. A truma only a kohen could eat. You give it to the kohen and only the kohen can eat it. And Maiser Rishon Levi. And the Maiser Rishon belongs to the Levi and only the Levi can eat it. We compare Maiser Rishon to Truma. Just like Truma only a kohen eats, Maiser Rishon also only a Levi eats. Divrei Rab Meir. That's Rab Meir's opinion. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah matiroi lekohen. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah allows for a kohen that even a kohen could eat the Maiser Rishon. So the Gemara asks on this, Matiroi meklal de ikke man da asar. When it says here that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah allows a kohen to eat from the Maiser Rishon, does that mean that somebody does not allow a kohen to eat from the Maiser Rishon? A kohen definitely is allowed to eat Maiser Rishon. If anything, a Yisrael, which is a Zar, can eat from the Maiser Rishon. But a kohen, there's somebody that says that a kohen is not allowed to eat Maiser Rishon. Rather, what he meant to say is nois noi af l'kohen. Doesn't mean that he could also eat, but what he was saying was that a Maiser Rishon could be given to a Levi or could be given even to a kohen. But here, this is the machlekes here. Rab Meir holds that only a Levi could eat Maiser Rishon, but Yisrael cannot, a Zar cannot. But the Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, everyone else holds that anybody could eat from Maiser Rishon. So the Gemara brings the source of this machlekes. My time with the Rab Meir. What's the reason for Rab Meir's opinion? So he had a tradition that this was the reason that Rab Meir himself said. The pasuk, it says, Ki es Maiser b'nei Yisrael asher yerim al Hashem truma. So when it says two things together in the pasuk, it says Maiser b'nei Yisrael, and then it says truma. So we compare Maiser Rishon to Truma. Ma Truma asura lezarim. Just like Truma is forbidden for any Zar to eat, only a kohen can eat Truma. Af Maiser Rishon asur lezarim. So to Maiser Rishon, only a Levi can eat, but a Zar cannot eat. So the Gemara says, no, if you compare Maiser Rishon to Truma, maybe I should go a step further and say, Ima Truma chayav alav misa v'chaimish. Maybe just like by Truma, so if you eat it b'mezid, you chayav misa b'dei shemayim, and if you eat it b'sheigig, you have to pay back an additional fifth. Af Maiser, so too I should say regarding Maiser Rishon, the same stringency applies. Chayav alav misa v'chaimish, that you should be chayav misa and a chaimish. So makra, for this we say no, the pasuk says umesu boy ki yechalaluhu, that the misa is only boy, and v'yasav chamishisai olav, which means boy v'loy b'maiser. Misa b'dei shemayim is only for truma and not if you eat maiser. And olav, you have to add a fifth olav if you eat from truma b'shaygig v'loy al maiser, but not from maiser. So therefore, that's the source for Rav Meir's opinion that says that truma belongs to the kohen and no one else could eat it, and maiser rishon only belongs to the kohen and no one else could eat it. The Gemara will then explain the opinion of the Rabbanan, as we'll see in Mitzvah Shem.